Welcome to the deep dive. You ever wondered what it really takes to unearth knowledge from centuries past and bring it to your ears? Well, today you get a front row seat. We're pulling back the curtain a bit.
Yeah, we thought it'd be interesting to talk about how we actually transform, complex historical source material into the kind of audio explorations you hear.
Exactly. We've just been deep in the world of Aryabhata's Aryabhatiya, which is just fascinating stuff.
Truly remarkable. And as we get ready to explore its impact more broadly, it felt like, well, the right time to share the journey behind that exploration.
The journey behind the journey. I like that.
Yeah, how do we go from, say, fragile ancient manuscripts or dense scholarly books to something you can actually listen to and hopefully learn from?
It's quite a process. I mean, think about it. Knowledge locked away, sometimes literally on palm leaves. Thousands of years old.
And then poured over by generations of scholars, right?
Yeah.
Each adding layers of interpretation.
And our job is to make that not just understandable, but actually, engaging for right now.
Which involves wrestling with everything from the original verses themselves to these critical editions jam-packed with notes and variant readings.
Yeah, those editions are crucial.
And of course, relying heavily on translators and commentators. It's a whole ecosystem.
It really is. It's a blend of detective work, you could say.
Yeah.
Linguistic skill, definitely. And a lot of patience.
A good dose of patience is key. But as you'll see, the rewards, the connections you make, they're pretty incredible.
So where does it usually start? What's the initial spark for something like, say, digging into Aryabhata?
Well, what was it for you?
For me, it's often just a sheer audacity, almost. The brilliance flashing across centuries.
Right.
I mean, you think about Aryabhata, 5th century. He's suggesting the Earth rotates on its axis.
Which is just mind-blowing for the time. We take it for granted now.
Completely. And then there's this calculation of pi, remarkably accurate, working with algebra way ahead of many other places.
That initial, wow, how did they figure that out back then? That sense of awe. That's usually the hook, isn't it?
It absolutely is. That's the engine that starts the whole thing. It makes you want to engage with the source material directly.
And that's where the first sort of practical challenge hits. Getting access to reliable versions.
Yeah, you can't just pop down a local library for a 5th century manuscript.
No, not usually. We often rely on digital archives, scanned manuscripts, if we're lucky.
Or, more often, these meticulously compiled academic editions, where scholars have spent years comparing versions, noting differences.
Critical editions, yeah. With all the notes about variant readings, different interpretations found in different manuscript copies. It's painstaking work.
And you realize pretty quickly, you're not just reading a document, you're stepping into this long chain, this lineage of preservation.
That's a great way to put it. A lineage of preservation. People dedicating their lives to making sure these texts survive and are understood.
It's humbling, really, to feel like you're maybe adding a tiny link to that chain.
Absolutely, and it highlights something important. Even before we grapple with Aryabhata's ideas, we're relying on all the scholars who made sure we even have a trustworthy text to grapple with.
It's collaboration across centuries.
Exactly. Okay, so you've got your hands on a reliable text. What's next? The language.
Oh, the language, yeah. Sanskrit verse. Aryabhata wrote the Aryabhatiya in verse.
Which is, it's known for being beautiful, precise.
Incredibly precise.
Yeah.
But in a scientific text, it's also incredibly dense, compressed.
That's the word, compressed. You're trying to pull complex math astronomy out of what are basically poems, highly structured poems.
It's a fascinating challenge in itself.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, these verses weren't really meant for someone like me to just pick up and read cold.
Right? They were often mnemonic tools, weren't they? Designed to be memorized.
Exactly. Memorized and then unpacked, elaborated on by a teacher through discussion.
Holding all that scientific detail in your head through concise poetic lines. Quite a feat of memory and pedagogy.
Which leads to a crucial point. We are utterly dependent on translators and Sanskrit scholars. Completely.
There's no getting around it. Their linguistic skill, their understanding of the cultural context, the intellectual world, it's indispensable.
And this brings up interpretation, doesn't it? Because we're reading through someone else's translation.
Always. We're engaging with the text via the translator's understanding. And even the best scholars might read the nuances of a super concise phrase slightly differently.
Right, so you might look at two different respected translations of the same verse and find subtle, but sometimes significant, differences in meaning.
And navigating that, comparing interpretations, trying to figure out the most likely intended meaning based on the broader context, that's a huge part of the process.
It's like, Like trying to understand a really complex legal document, maybe, where every single word matters intensely and different experts might slightly disagree on the exact implications.
That's a good analogy. And layered on top of the general Sanskrit is the specialized technical language.
Oh yeah, math terms, astronomical concepts, specific units of measurement. It's a whole vocabulary specific to that time and field.
A vocabulary reflecting their way of seeing and measuring the cosmos, which isn't always a direct one-to-one match with ours.
And the really tricky part, often, is the brevity, the inference required.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a verse might give you a rule or a result, like here's how you calculate X.
Okay.
But the why, the detailed proof, the underlying geometry, the step-by-step derivation that's often just implied, assumed knowledge.
Ah, right. The original audience, maybe students working with a teacher, they were expected to fill in those gaps themselves, perhaps.
Exactly. They likely had a baseline understanding, shared assumptions. We don't necessarily.
Think about, say, his methods for calculating sign differences in the Golapāda section. The verses give a method, elegant, but the underlying geometric proof, the real aha of how it works, and it's not explicitly laid out in the verse itself.
You have to reconstruct it, or more accurately, rely on those who have reconstructed it.
Which brings us to the commentaries.
Yes, absolutely vital. Figures like Bhaskara I, writing centuries later. Their commentaries are like gold.
They provide the explanations, the proofs, sometimes alternative ways of looking at it. They really unpack those dense verses.
They're like the essential guidebooks, the Rosetta Stones, almost, for decoding the technical bits. They give you the why behind the what.
But even then, it's not always simple, is it? You're reading interpretations from different eras.
No, it's layers upon layers. Brilliant minds across time, building on each other, sometimes disagreeing subtly.
Offering different perspectives, maybe using slightly different mathematical approaches to explain the same point.
So you have to synthesize, weigh the different commentaries, compare them back to the original verse, try to arrive at the clearest picture of Aryabhata's original thought.
It's like historical detective work combined with mathematical reasoning, piecing together a complex puzzle.
Okay, so we've wrestled with the language, the technical stuff, the interpretations. Let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about something maybe more universal: time and focus.
Ah, yes. The scarcest resource in modern life, it often feels like.
It really does. It's one thing to have the texts, the translations, the commentaries. It's another thing entirely to find the actual time and the mental space to engage with them deeply.
That's such a crucial point. We're not monks in a medieval scriptorium, are we?
Definitely not. Most of us have jobs, families, emails, pinging, phones buzzing, the constant stream of distractions.
And trying to carve out genuinely uninterrupted time where you can really sink your teeth into, say, reconstructing an ancient algorithm for predicting eclipses, that's tough.
It really is. It requires sustained concentration, the kind of deep focus that feels increasingly rare, or at least harder to achieve.
There's a real tension, isn't there, between the kind of deep, slow, contemplative thinking needed for this stuff and the fast-paced, fragmented attention our modern world seems to demand.
Totally. Trying to get your head around the Kuṭṭākāra algorithm, that complex method for solving indeterminate equations, while your inbox is piling up.
You lose your thread, you have to backtrack, restart. It makes everything take so much longer.
And there's an emotional side too, right? You finally get that hour, you sit down, you hit a really dense part, and it's easy to feel discouraged.
Oh, absolutely. That feeling of just hitting a wall where the concepts aren't clicking, it happens all the time.
And the temptation to just, I'll come back to this later when I'm feeling fresher.
Which sometimes never happens, because fresher requires actively creating and defending that focused time.
It's a constant battle, isn't it? It really is a marathon, not a sprint. Requires consistent effort, actively pushing distractions away.
Building that mental space is as much a part of the process as the reading itself.
So true. Okay, let's say you've carved out the time, you're deep in the text.
Yeah.
Then you hit another fascinating challenge: bridging the worldviews.
Ah, the conceptual gap between Aryabhata's world and ours. It's significant.
Huge. We live in a post-Copernican, post-Einstein universe. You know, our whole framework for thinking about the cosmos is fundamentally different.
Whereas Aryabhata, despite his brilliance, was working within a geocentric model based on what you could see with the naked eye.
Exactly. So when we talk about his idea of the Earth rotating, using that fantastic boat analogy from the Golapāda.
Where someone on a boat sees the banks moving backwards.
Yeah. It's a brilliant observation about relative motion. But we have to be so careful not to just equate it directly with our modern understanding of astrophysics.
We have to present it within his context, right? Understand his frame of reference, his assumptions, his observational basis.
It requires a real effort of historical empathy, trying to see the world through 5th century eyes, using only the tools and concepts available then.
Stepping outside our own ingrained scientific paradigm for a moment. Appreciating the ingenuity within the limitations of the time.
Understanding their questions, their goals on their own terms, not judging them by what came centuries later.
And this is the interesting part. It's also about finding the connections, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Even if the models are different, the underlying quest, the desire to predict planetary movements accurately, for example, that's a shared human endeavor.
Or the reliance on mathematical reasoning to understand the physical world. That thread runs through history.
So it's about finding that ancient code, as the outline put it, and showing how it resonates with the modern mind, but without forcing it.
Yeah, no forced equivalence, just highlighting genuine echoes, shared problems, underlying principles. It's a delicate balance.
Okay, so assuming we've navigated the language, the text stuff, the time constraints, the worldview gap, now comes the part where we actually turn it into something people can listen to.
The transformation into audio, which is a whole different beast.
It really is. Because the Aryabhatiya, well, it wasn't written to be performed, was it?
No. It's dense, technical, designed for study, for discourse among people already somewhat in the know.
And explaining complex geometry, or the steps in a mathematical procedure using only sound. No diagrams, no equations on a whiteboard.
That's the core challenge of this format, right? How do you make abstract concepts clear and engaging without visuals?
It takes a lot of thought about structure. How do you group ideas logically? How do you explain things step by step verbally?
And finding the right language. Clear, precise, avoiding jargon where possible, using analogies.
Analogies become so important. Vivid descriptions to help people build a mental picture, like that kadamba flower analogy Aryabhata uses for the stars.
That's a beautiful one. It helps visualize the apparent motion.
Pacing is also crucial, isn't it? Knowing when to pause, when to repeat a key idea, making sure it sinks in an audio-only context.
Absolutely. And editing plays a huge role. Shaping the flow, cutting out anything that muddies the waters, ensuring the rhythm feels natural and keeps you engaged.
It's also about finding the story within the science.
Yeah.
What's the narrative thread? What are the aha moments we can highlight?
Even in technical material, there's usually a story of discovery, of ingenuity. Bringing that out makes it more than just a list of facts.
And then there's the tough decision. What details are essential? What can be simplified without losing accuracy?
That's a constant negotiation. You want rigor, but you don't want to overwhelm people, especially in audio. You need to hit that sweet spot.
It's about focusing on the core concepts, the big picture, while still giving enough detail to show the how and why.
A balancing act, always. Rigor versus accessibility.
Throughout all of this, interpretation, translation, structuring for audio, there's this underlying sense of responsibility, isn't there?
Definitely. A big one. We're handling someone's intellectual legacy from a different time, a different culture.
And Aryabhata himself, interestingly, seemed aware of this. Right at the end of the Golapāda section, he includes this warning.
About creating a counterfeit or distortion of his work, pratikañcukaṃ. It's quite striking.
It really is. And while we're not literally rewriting his text, we are interpreting it, presenting it in a new format. That carries weight.
Absolutely. It means a commitment to accuracy, grounding everything in solid scholarship.
Being transparent about where there are debates or different interpretations among scholars. Giving credit where it's due.
Acting as careful stewards, really. Respectful stewards of this knowledge.
Trying to transmit the essence, the integrity of the ideas, even as we adapt the delivery for today. It feels important.
It is important. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the challenges, the hurdles, the responsibilities, but what about the rewards? What makes it worthwhile?
The rewards. For me, it's those moments, those clicks.
Yeah.
When you've been wrestling with a really complex idea, maybe staring at a commentary for ages, and suddenly it just makes sense.
It's a flash of understanding.
Yes. Understanding the elegance of a proof from 1600 years ago, or grasping the ingenuity behind how they modeled the heavens. It's exhilarating.
It feels like, I don't know, like shaking hands across time.
That's exactly it. An intellectual handshake with this brilliant mind from so long ago. It's a profound connection.
And it deepens your appreciation, doesn't it? For the history of science, for human ingenuity across cultures.
Immensely. Seeing how people tackled fundamental questions with the tools they had. It's inspiring.
And for me, ultimately, the biggest reward is sharing that journey.
Yes, absolutely.
Sharing it with you, the listeners, seeing the engagement, the questions, knowing that these ancient ideas are sparking curiosity now.
That's what makes it all worthwhile, doesn't it? Knowing that the ancient code still resonates, that people are interested, that they're exploring along with us.
That shared exploration, that connection, that's what brings it all alive. It makes the whole challenging process meaningful.
So as you can hopefully appreciate now, there's quite a bit that goes into creating these deep dives. It's a journey through, well, everything we've talked about. Language, math, history, interpretation.
Bridging time, bridging worldviews, it's demanding work, requires focus, requires patience.
But as we said, it's also incredibly rewarding. We genuinely hope you found this peek behind the curtain interesting.
And thank you, truly, for joining us not just today, but on all these explorations. Your curiosity really is what fuels this whole thing.
It absolutely is. Now, next time, we'll be shifting focus back fully onto Aryabhata himself, looking at his lasting impact, his legacy through the centuries. Should be fascinating.
Definitely looking forward to that. Until then,
keep exploring, keep questioning,
and keep decoding the ancient codes that still have so much to teach us.